r/ProRevenge. Want to bully me for my disability? Have fun getting suspended for littering. Story 1. I got very sick with what we know now is a life-threatening illness when I was 12. I was never great at making friends due to family issues, so I had a small gathering of friends who I didn't realize weren't really my friends and just kept me around to poke fun at. Because I was so ill and doctors were trying to figure out why, I missed a lot of school, and at first, doctors didn't think I'd be able to pull through. But after missing a decent amount of school, I got a bit more stable and began being tutored from home to make up for the work I missed. I worked my ass off so I could move to the next grade with all my friends, and it paid off. I made it. But when I was doing well enough to be able to go to school for a couple of days a week, I realized one of my so-called friends had begun really tearing into my reputation at school hard. So this girl, let's call her Sarah, told everyone I was out because I was pregnant and had a contagious disease. Everyone in school was laughing and making fun of me. I was being called horrible things. I was only 13, and it was very emotionally and physically hard for me to deal with all of this, especially after she began physically bullying me as well. When I told the school, they brought her in and we spoke together. It just made things worse. They started brushing me off when I'd come in and tell them that she was getting worse, causing me to be more depressed than ever before. After months of dealing with this all, I heard about our annual class field trip. It was a glammed-up version of camping with heated cabins, carnival rides and equipment, a lake for boating, and even horse stables. It was a talk of the year and everyone was going. It took weeks of begging my parents for them to agree that I could go. The conditions were that I would have to have the school nurse as my chaperone and I could only stay one night, whereas everyone else stayed 2 nights and 3 days. I was so excited to finally be able to do something normal that didn't involve hospitals and tests and treatments. Everyone in school chose their groups quickly. My friend group filled their cabin, so Sarah and I were the odd ones out. We got placed in a cabin with a bunch of other girls who were also extras in their friend groups. I absolutely dreaded being in a cabin with her, but I did my best to enjoy my day at the camp before having to get into the cabin at night. Most of the girls were eating and sitting in front of the fireplace, joking around, along with Sarah. Everyone was complaining about how this large group of popular girls got the boat cabin. The boat cabin was the best cabin, the only one with 2 stories and overlooking the lake. They had better beds, more room, a full kitchen, more showers, and a balcony. These popular girls had convinced the principal, by their parents, to let them stay there. Everyone was jealous. Right then and there, I formed my revenge plan on Sarah. I began to tell the other girls that we should totally prank those boat cabin girls. They all eagerly listened as I told them to grab rolls of toilet paper, baby soap one had brought for showering, and toothpaste. Sitting in front of this all, I told them that only one person should go so no one would see. Everyone fought over who got to be the one to go and stick it to those boat cabin girls. Seeing as it was my idea, I suggested Sarah go. I hyped her up, telling her that she was the fastest in gym class and she'd be done quickly and quietly. The girls, they all nodded in agreement. After waiting until it was early in the morning, around 2 a.m., we opened a window and sent Sarah on her way to the cabin with the supplies. She came back 30 minutes later. She boasted to everyone how it was her idea first and how she did it. She took credit for it, making it even better. They all played music and celebrated our accomplishments before going to bed. The next morning, the boat cabin girls were pretty pissed. I have to give it to Sarah. She did an amazing job. I rushed to the boat cabin before my parents came to see what she had done. The entire place was coated in damp, mushy toilet paper. It had rained a bit overnight, so the toilet paper was stuck on the roof and the deck and couldn't easily be removed. It was going to have to be scrapped. Some had flittered into some bushes and on the lakeside before it had rained, where it now sat in piles of mush. The door to the cabin had been unlocked, so on top of putting some toothpaste all over the porch, she had put some baby oil on all the doorknobs and floor inside. She put the toothpaste on the girls' pillows as they slept so they'd roll into it. The girls from that cabin were livid. They all had a shower that morning to get the toothpaste out of their hair, some in cold water. Most had fallen upon getting out of bed thanks to the baby soap on the tiled floor. They had to clean the mess inside before even realizing the mess outside. Sarah was boasting about it, telling everyone from other cabins how she pranked those girls. People all sat in front of her as she told the story of how she did it all. I knew what was coming up next. I left early. My parents came to pick me up and I got in the car and left, sadly missing out on what would happen next. Before I left, I mentioned to a teacher that Sarah had done something bad the night before. and that she wouldn't listen to me when I told her to stay in the cabin. The next week in school, I heard Sarah got suspended. The camp owners were pissed and originally blamed the boat cabin for the mess before finding out it was Sarah. They forced her to clean the wet toilet paper and wash the floors and doorknobs. She cried the whole time and ended up getting suspended after the camp owners claimed she littered and caused chaos. Sarah tried to tell the school it was my fault, but they had never had any issue with me before, so it was a bit unbelievable. Plus, she had already told everyone else she did it. The girls in my cabin that night kept their mouths shut about it being my idea. Whether they just forgot, weren't believed, didn't want to be involved, or didn't care, I don't know, but I was off the hook. Sarah called me angrily, and I told her I was done being bullied by her. Had she just left me alone, I never would have done all of this. She stopped speaking to me and continued to bully me behind my back, but nowhere near to the degree she had been before. Now, there were times I felt bad about it all, but after the school did nothing to help when I was being picked on so severely, in my opinion, we were even. Story 2. Hell hath no fury like me scorned. Now, this story starts 31 years ago, but the revenge part was pure serendipity that began 2 years ago. I learned a lot on this journey, and part of the reason for this write-up is to share that with others. So, the beginning. In 1990, when I was just out of middle school and my sister was still in elementary, my dad met his third wife at the only gas station in our town. They soon moved in together, and my dad abandoned us in our basement apartment to live on a shanty houseboat that didn't run to live with her. He would show up every other week and give me $40 for groceries. Eventually, someone figured out the situation and called my mom. We went to live with her, which was, believe it or not, worse. My dad and his shanty wife got married in 1991. Not long after, she called me and told me my dad's brain tumor had returned, it hadn't, and that he couldn't handle the stress of being around us, that the only people he could bear to be around were her and her son, Shorty, who was around my age. When I called my dad to ask if this was true, he said it wasn't, and he just couldn't believe she would say that. That was one of our last conversations, until 2 years ago. The middle. There's not much in this part. I worked my way through college, living in my car from time to time. My dad and I had no contact, but I heard from family that he'd bought a house and put his son through some vocational classes. When my grandmother died, Shorty and Shanty wife showed up in a truck and took all the furniture and anything else that wasn't tied down or already gone. Eventually, I went no contact with my dad's side of the family. I struggled for years, decades really, but I made it, and I have a great job and a good family now too. The best revenge is living well, right? The pre and warm-up. 2 years ago, October 2019, I got a call from my dad's brother, Alan. He told me my dad was in a nursing home in another state, great, and I needed to go see him because he needed my help. Shorty had ghosted him, of course. The nursing home, coincidentally, was about 20 minutes from my house, and I saw an opportunity and I went. The reunion was underwhelming. I didn't want to make amends, but I did want to hear how he wound up dumped and all alone in another state. And it was a really, really good story. Shanty's wife got lung cancer and put my dad in a nursing home before she died in 2017. She suffered, and I was happy to hear it, but sad it wasn't cancer. Shorty became his power of attorney when she died and had been visiting my dad, living in my dad's house with his 2 children and taking care of my dad's affairs since his mom died. But now he was missing in action and my dad was worried about him. He asked me to drive an hour and a half to his house to check on everything. That's all he wanted. He'd never even asked me how I had been. So anyway, I agreed to go, I think out of morbid curiosity more than anything else. I'd never been even to my dad's house before. I did want to see where he lived with his real family for 30 years. I wanted to see what could have been my life. It was 50 shades of awful. The grass hadn't been cut all summer. You couldn't get to the front door of the overgrowth. There were 3 pickup trucks in the yard. 2 were full of trash. Cabs and beds and back seats are just trash. Mail, clothes, paper, shoes, garbage bags. I couldn't understand it. My dad's handicap modified SUV was on 4 flats and full of garbage too. I didn't have a key, so I just walked around. From what windows I could look through, the inside was in shambles and hoarded to hell. On the front and carport doors were dozens of notices from the city that they were going to condemn the place. The carport was also hoarded, boxes and boxes stacked on each other, mostly rotting from the rain. The yard was full of garbage, broken Christmas ornaments, more shoes, rusted tools, and old toys. There was a letter in the mailbox notifying him that since the house was abandoned, mail would not be delivered anymore. That night, I Googled powers of attorney and how to use them. I went back the next day and showed my bed-bound dad the pictures on my phone. He vowed to beat Shorty's ass and then asked me to help more. I told him I would, but he'd have to sign a power of attorney over to me. All of it is durable, financial, and medical. If he didn't, he could figure this crap out by himself. He agreed, so I set about finding a lawyer who would drive to another state and do the paperwork in the nursing home. Bless that lawyer for being so good at his job because all I did was tell him what I knew, and he put together a beautifully bulletproof POA. It was full of stuff I didn't even know I would need. He also filed the paperwork to revoke Shorty's POA, and now I'm unstoppable. We're from a small, rural town, and it's the kind of creepy, landlocked place that no matter how long you've been gone or how far you've been when you go back, you'll see someone you know. Even if you don't know you know them, it's like playing 7 degrees of everybody all the time. It's suffocating, but it can also be helpful. The beginning of the end. I got to work the next morning. I didn't know how scorched the earth would be when I finished, and I didn't want Shorty or anyone from his prolific inbred family trying to find me. So I made sure nothing I did had my name on it. I opened a Google account for my dad and got a Google number. I opened a P.O. box for him in his town. I put in a mail forwarding notice. I pulled his credit report. I took the POA to my dad's small town bank, changed the address on his accounts, and got new account numbers. I requested copies of every transaction back to the day Shanty's wife had died, about 13 months worth. I had to go to the main branch, 2 hours from my house, the next day to pick the records up. I sat in the lobby all afternoon going through the account. I cornered a service rep and got a crash course in his debits and deposits. This is when I figured out the extent of Shorty's staggering stupidity. My dad got about $5,000 a month in disability and Social Security every month. Twice a week, Shorty was going into a branch and withdrawing cash, all of the cash, for 13 months. And every time he did it as a POA, he had to sign a form stating that he was acting on behalf of my dad, and that form was notarized by the bank. I went through every single withdrawal and got the bank to confirm that every one of them was made by Shorty. Then I went to the house and called a locksmith. I knew it was bad, but I had no idea what was waiting for me there. He got the first door open and the stench rolled out like a fog bank. We both gagged. 2 locks later, I was so embarrassed by what he had to see and smell, I gave him a $60 tip. And with shiny new keys in hand, I called the cops. I told them I was POA for my dad, was checking in on his house, and there were 3 vehicles there that didn't belong to him. He asked me if I knew who they belonged to. I said no, and I wanted them towed. He told me to call a tow company and he would meet them there. They showed up with 2 wreckers. The tow truck guy got out and asked me for a signature. I only signed my first name. As I was signing, he asked, "Do you know Shorty?" Running on pure hatred at this point, I surprised myself. "Do you?" I asked. He said he did and that he's an I responded, "Yeah, he might be. Hey, can you do me a favor? If you see him, will you tell him MNWNM is coming for him?" His bravado evaporated. He knows a crazy guy when he sees one. They towed the trucks. When everyone was gone, I opened the door to the carport to peek in. The sun was going down and it was dark in the house. I heard something faint and after some seconds realized it was the roaches and the rats doing the roach and rat stuff. I could smell it all in my hair. I sat on the carport steps and watched the sun go down. I was mad, just so frickin' cosmically livid that 72 hours was all it took to dissolve 3 decades, and here I was, stinking and listening to the rats and cleaning everyone else's crap up, taking time away from my family, and for what? I had a coming to Jesus with myself. I could bow out now or double down. And the thing is, I'm tenacious, to a goddamn fault. I had to be to survive, and this was a bone I couldn't put down. The thought of Shorty's life being upended, his only source of income probably disappearing literally overnight, and my dad having to hear secondhand from me that he's broke and alone made me absolutely giddy. I desperately wanted them both to lose what they had left, so I decided I was going to triple dog down. That night, I Googled restraining orders, and it was surprisingly easy to get one. I went to the courthouse in my hometown, went to the clerk's office and told her I needed a restraining order. I filled the form in at a rickety little table while I was there. I wasn't prepared to see a judge that day, but she took the form and said, "Okay, I'll see if the judge is still here." That kind of scared me. She took me to his chambers, and as I was waiting, I looked around and saw he had certificates of appreciation hanging up from various veteran groups. Then I wiped my palms and thought, fish in a barrel. He asked about my dad's stint in the Marines and about the Department of Defense office logo on my sweater. I'm a contractor. He read my form and granted the temporary order. I would have to go back for the permanent one where Shorty would be able to argue against it. Then I went home and Googled biohazard companies and elder statutes in my state. I hired a biohazard company to shovel all the crap out of the house for $7,000. I would have paid double. They sent me pictures and salvaged some papers. Shorty was served during this time and a hearing was sent. I got to work collecting and documenting. I made pictures and spreadsheets and timelines with cross-references because, screw it, now they had my full attention. The paid versions of Truthfinder and Trello seriously got me through all of this. In my spare time, I went to the nursing home and gave my dad 8x10 copies of the pictures of his dead dog, from every angle. Before the court, I went to the police station nearby and told them I wanted to report an elder crime. A white-collar detective came out and told me it was a domestic matter, and that since Shorty had been POA, everything he had done was legal. And this was the day I got to teach a small-town detective about the fiduciary responsibilities of a POA. Thanks, Google. I handed him a copy of the statute with the applicable sections highlighted. Then I handed him a thick folder with bank statements, pictures of the hoarded house and dead dog, a copy of my dad's credit report that showed he was tens and tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and a spreadsheet listing every cash withdrawal with a running total of the stolen amounts. The grand total was just over $130,000 in cash. That's not including the lost value of the house or the credit cards he opened and used. I told him he could keep that folder since it wasn't the only one I had. Then I told him I would wait for a case number and I sat down. He came back about 30 minutes later and apologized, said I had a case and gave me a case number. Then I headed over to the courthouse. This is the end. There were other people there and I had to wait my turn. And while I was waiting, that stupid slept his sloppy ass into the courtroom by himself and obviously, literally, non-metaphorically, dirty. His shoes were untied and that turned my giggle box over. Then it was our turn and we stood up. The same judge asked me some questions, asked him some questions, and asked me if I had any proof. I had a very thick folder of it. The judge asked me if I had gone to the police. Well, yes, sir, I have. Do you have a case number? As a matter of fact, the order was granted permanently and for life, but not before the judge halted proceedings and told Shorty he needed a lawyer. Someone told me that the courthouse would have a copy of my dad's DD-214 discharge papers. So while I was there, I got a copy of those because why not? I also used my POA to take Shanty wife off the deed to the house. That way, if my dad died and it went into probate, Shorty had no immediate claim. I also went and got copies of my dad's birth certificate and Shanty's wife's death certificate. Now, technically, stepchildren can't request that info, but the clerk who waited on me recognized my dad's name and told me she lost her virginity to my Uncle Alan in the 60s. I went to my grandparents' funeral, so I got all the forms I wanted. Shanty wife left my dad $50,000 in life insurance. About $35,000 of that was left since Shorty was spending my dad's money and not his mom's. So I opened an Ally account and transferred every penny over. Then I set up recurring transfers for the monthly deposits. At any given time, there was no more than $100 in his account. I also found a house flipper that paid me enough for the house to pay off his mortgage. That's the thing about probate. There's nothing to fight over if there's nothing there. And I made sure there was nothing there. My dad died thinking he still owned a house. Speaking of which, this is about the time I found my dad's life insurance policies. They were up to date and Shanty's wife was the beneficiary. My POA didn't allow me to change beneficiaries, but it allowed me to assign them, and since Shanty's wife was dead, there was technically no beneficiary. And this is where the death certificates came in handy. So I assigned my sister and myself as beneficiaries, irrevocable too, which means that the only way to change that is for my dad and me and my sister to agree to it. I kept my dad in the dark about all of this. The only thing he ever really knew about was the restraining order and his dead dog. I found out that he had purchased a gravesite next to Shanty's wife and wanted to be buried next to her. That was just never going to happen. I Googled national cemeteries and found out he qualified to be in one since he was a disabled Vietnam-era veteran, so I arranged for that instead. All the cherries on top, My dad died in June this year and I was there. He's buried in a national cemetery far away where no one will ever go visit him. The only obituary I ran was on the funeral home's website, and that was only for insurance purposes. I wrote it as vaguely as possible. There was no service. His urn is purple, the color he hated most. I got a call in August from the prosecutor's office in my hometown. The lady on the other end is married to my first cousin because of course she is. That's how it works there. Shorty was arrested just after midnight on July 1st, was still in jail, and had been arraigned on felony elder charges. He's facing 10 years in prison. She told me not to expect a trial anytime soon as it can take up to 3 years for that to happen. I told her that was awesome since the uncertainty will hopefully haunt him. And after all that, he still got prison to look forward to. He lost his kids, he lost his dad. I'm spending his mom's cancer money. He lost his free house and trucks. He has no credit and will never be able to get any sort of decent job and will, hopefully for a long time, not be able to find a decent place to live. And I sleep like a baby.